The silence of my apartment at 1 in the morning broke with a knock. Heavy, deliberate, knowing. My hand instinctively grabbed the pepper spray on the shelf as I crept to the door. When I looked through the peephole, my blood turned to ice. Standing in the hallway was my father, the same man whose funeral I attended 4 years ago. He looked straight at the lens and whispered, "Open the door." My name is Sarah Snow, and at 32 years old, I had convinced myself that the dead stay dead. I lived my life by the hard logic of facts and evidence. I was an investigative reporter and an independent podcaster, a career built on digging through the trash of the powerful to find the receipts they thought they had shredded. My apartment in Cleveland, Ohio, was my bunker. It was a small, third-floor walk-up that smelled permanently of old paper and coffee, a place where I felt safe because I controlled the locks. It was exactly 1 in the morning when the world tilted on its axis. The silence in my apartment was absolute. The only light came from the blue glow of my laptop screen, which was currently displaying the jagged waveforms of my latest audio file. I had been editing for 6 hours straight, trying to clean up the audio on an interview with a whistleblower regarding a series of mysterious financial corruption cases involving offshore shell companies. My eyes burned. The headache behind my temples was a dull, rhythmic thumping that matched the beat of the city outside. I saved the file, closed the laptop, and listened to the hum of the refrigerator. I was reaching for the glass of stale water on my desk when the sound came. Knock, knock, knock. It was not the tentative rap of a neighbor complaining about noise. It was not the frantic pounding of someone in trouble. It was slow. It was heavy. It was deliberate. I froze. My hand hovered over the water glass. The sound had come from my front door, and it carried a weight that vibrated through the floorboards. At 1 in the morning in this part of Cleveland, a knock on the door was never good news. It was usually a mistake, a drunk looking for the wrong apartment, or a threat. My instincts, sharpened by a decade of chasing stories that people did not want told, kicked in before my conscious brain could catch up. I did not call out. I did not ask who was there. Instead, I moved silently across the room, my socks sliding over the hardwood floor. I reached for the bookshelf near the entryway where I kept a canister of pepper spray hidden behind a row of legal thrillers. My fingers curled around the cold metal cylinder. I flipped the safety lock off. The knock came again, 3 more times, harder now, more urgent. It sounded like the person on the other side knew exactly where I was standing. They knew I was awake. They knew I was listening. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic drum solo in the quiet room. I ran through the mental list of people who might want to hurt me. There was the local councilman whose embezzlement scheme I had exposed last winter. There was the anonymous emailer who had threatened to sue me if I released this current episode. Could it be the police? No. The police would have announced themselves. This was personal. I pressed my back against the wall next to the door and took a shallow breath. I needed to see. I needed to know what I was dealing with. I slid completely silent to the center of the door and pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the hallway, bending the walls into a funhouse curve, but the figure standing under the flickering fluorescent light was perfectly clear. The breath left my lungs in a painful rush. The floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet, sending my stomach plunging into a freefall. It was a man. He was wearing a dark, heavy coat that looked damp from the night air. He had graying hair that was cut short, and a face that I knew better than my own. It was Arthur Lowell, my father. My brain rejected the image immediately. It was a glitch, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and caffeine. Arthur Lowell was dead. I had seen the coroner's report. I had held my mother's hand while we stood in the freezing rain at a cemetery in Wyoming 4 years ago. I remembered the smell of the wet earth and the overpowering, cloying scent of white lilies. I remembered the sound of the dirt hitting the mahogany lid of the casket. That casket had been closed because of the car accident, they said. But the death was a fact. It was the most solid fact of my life. But the man in the hallway did not vanish. He shifted his weight, looking impatient. He looked older than the picture I kept on my nightstand. His face was gaunt, the skin pulled tight over his cheekbones, and there was a roughness to him that hadn't been there before. But the eyes were the same. The set of the jaw was the same. He lifted his head and looked straight into the peephole, as if he could see my pupil dilating in the darkness on the other side. "Sarah," he said. The voice was not muffled by the wood. It was his voice, that specific, deep timbre that used to read me bedtime stories, the voice that had taught me how to drive, the voice that I had replayed in my head 1,000 times since the funeral, just so I wouldn't forget it. "Open the door, honey," he whispered, the sound rough like gravel. "It is Dad. We do not have much time." I stumbled back, the pepper spray shaking in my hand. This was a trick. It had to be. Someone had done their research. Someone had used deepfake technology to reconstruct his voice. Or maybe this was a cruel prank by someone who knew my history. But how could they get the face so right? How could they replicate the specific way he tilted his head to the left when he was stressed? "Go away," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm calling the police." "Do not call the police," the man said. His tone shifted from pleading to commanding, the tone he used when I was a teenager and about to do something stupid. "If you make that call, the people listening will know I am here. Sarah, listen to me." I gripped the pepper spray tighter. "My father is dead. You are sick. Get away from my door." "I am not dead," he said, pressing his forehead against the wood. I could hear his breath hitch. "The accident was necessary. I had to leave. But I never wanted to leave you." Tears pricked my eyes. Hot and angry. This was a violation. Someone was weaponizing my grief against me. I wanted to scream, to tear the door open and spray this imposter in the face, but my feet were rooted to the spot. "Prove it," I hissed. The journalist in me took over, desperate to dismantle the lie. "If you are him, tell me something. Tell me something only he would know." Silence stretched in the hallway. I could hear the distant wail of a siren blocks away. I waited for him to fail. I waited for him to guess something generic, like the name of a pet or the name of my high school. "The lake," he said softly. "Behind the house in Colorado. You were 7. The blood drained from my face. "You swam out too far," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "You got tangled in the weeds. You went under. I dove in. I pulled you up. You were not breathing. I did CPR on the dock. You coughed up lake water and the first thing you said to me was that you lost your ribbon." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. The cold, dark water. The panic of the weeds wrapping around my ankles like snakes. The burning in my lungs. And the feeling of his rough hands pressing on my small chest. We never told Mom. We never told Miles. It was our secret. A pact of silence forged in a near-death experience. "You made me promise never to tell Mom," he said through the door, "because you did not want her to be scared of the water." I lowered the pepper spray. My entire body was shaking now. A violent tremor that started in my hands and rattled my teeth. It was impossible. It defied biology, physics, and the legal system. But the man standing in my hallway knew the texture of my darkest childhood memory. I moved back to the door. My hand reached for the deadbolt. It felt like I was moving through molasses. I turned the lock with a loud click. Then I undid the lower lock. But I left the safety chain on. I was not stupid. I was terrified. But I was still Sarah Snow. I cracked the door open 3 inches. The hallway light cut a slice across my dark living room. Through the gap, I saw him. He was real. He was 3-dimensional. I could smell him. Not the scent of lilies and death, but the smell of old tobacco, rain, and fear. He looked at me through the crack. His eyes were red-rimmed. There was a desperate urgency in his expression that I had never seen on him before. He looked at the chain, then at my face. "Sarah," he said, and seeing him say my name with his own lips broke something inside me. "Please." I looked for the seams in the mask. I looked for the deception. But all I saw was my father. 4 years older. 4 years more tired. Looking at me like I was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. With a trembling hand, I slid the chain out of its track. I pulled the door open. He stepped inside immediately, kicking the door shut behind him and locking the deadbolt in one fluid motion. He did not hug me. He did not cry. He moved to the window and peered through the blinds, checking the street below. Then he turned to face me. The room felt too small for the magnitude of this resurrection. I stood there, clutching the pepper spray, unable to form a sentence. "Dad," I whispered. The word felt foreign on my tongue. He looked at me, and for a second, the hardness in his face softened. He reached out as if to touch my shoulder, then pulled his hand back. "I am sorry, Sarah," he said. "I am so sorry I left you." "You died," I said, my voice rising. "We buried you, Miles and Mom and I. We buried you." "That was not me," he said flatly. "That was a lie, a necessary lie." "Why?" I demanded. "Why are you here? Why now?" He stepped closer, and the shadow he cast on the wall seemed to swallow the room. The exhaustion in his eyes was replaced by a terrifying intensity. "Because the timeline has changed," he said. "What timeline?" He looked at the laptop on my desk, then back at me. "The thing you thought was my death was just the first act. It was a play. Sarah, a show for the people watching from the cheap seats. But tonight, the script changed." He took a breath, and the words that followed turned the air in the room to ice. "They are done with the first act," he said. "Tonight, they are preparing to stage the second death, and this time, the death is yours." My hands were still shaking as I sat on the edge of the velvet armchair. My knees pressed together, creating a physical barrier between myself and the man sitting on my sofa. The adrenaline that had surged through me when I opened the door was beginning to curdle into a cold, heavy dread. I stared at his face. I was not looking at his eyes anymore, but at his chin. There was a scar there. It was a jagged white line about an inch long, cutting through the stubble. I remembered the day he got it. I was 6 years old, wobbling on a bicycle with training wheels that were uneven. I had panicked, swerved, and driven straight into him as he knelt to tie his shoe. The pedal had caught his jaw. I remembered the blood, so much red against the suburban concrete, and how he had laughed through the pain just to stop me from crying. Plastic surgery could replicate a nose. It could shift a hairline. But a scar like that, with that specific topography, was a map of our shared history. "It is me, Sarah," he said, watching my eyes track the old wound. "You are dead," I said. It was not an accusation, but a statement of the reality I had lived in for 1,460 days. "I went to your funeral." "You went to a ceremony," Arthur corrected, his voice low. "You buried a casket. You did not bury me." The room seemed to tilt. I closed my eyes, and suddenly, the smell of my apartment, old paper and coffee, vanished, replaced by the biting wind of a small town in Wyoming. I was back at the cemetery. The sky was a flat, oppressive gray. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes. We stood around a mahogany casket that gleamed under the dull light. It was closed. I remembered asking Miles, my younger brother, if we could open it. I wanted to say goodbye. I needed to see him one last time to make it real. Miles had gripped my elbow, his fingers digging into my coat. "It was a fire." "Sarah," Miles had whispered, his voice steady, reasonable, and utterly final. "The car burned. There is nothing left that you want to see. Remember him as he was." My mother, Elaine, had been a ghost that day. She stood draped in black, leaning heavily against Miles, her eyes glazed over with sedatives. She did not speak. She did not throw earth on the grave. She just stared at the horizon as if she were waiting for a bus that would never come. I had played the role of the strong older sister. I hugged the distant relatives. I thanked the priest. I signed the checks for the funeral home. I accepted the narrative because the alternative was too horrific to consider. "The casket was closed," I whispered, opening my eyes to the dim light of my living room. "Miles said, he said the car burned." "There was a fire," Arthur said. He leaned forward, clasping his hands between his knees. But I was not in the car. The body inside that box was a John Doe, a compatible cadaver supplied by the people I worked for, a poor soul with no family to ask questions, pulled from a morgue in Chicago and burned just enough to prevent visual identification. I felt bile rise in my throat. You let us mourn you. You let Mom collapse. You let me grieve for 4 years. I had no choice, he snapped, and for a second, the fatherly warmth evaporated, revealing a man who had been running for his life. If I had stayed, they would have killed all of us, not just me, you, Miles, your mother. Disappearing was the only way to take the target off your backs. Who are they? I asked. You were a compliance officer for a mid-sized investment firm. You checked boxes on tax forms. Dad, you were not a spy. Arthur let out a dry, bitter laugh. I was the compliance director for Orion Crest Capital. On paper, we managed diversified portfolios for high-net-worth individuals. In reality, Orion Crest was a laundry machine. We scrubbed gray money until it came out white. Drug money, arms deals, political bribes. We made it look like legitimate returns on tech startups and real estate. He paused, looking at the window as a car drove by outside, casting headlights across the ceiling. But Orion Crest is just a shell, he continued. The real owners are the Vale and Harrow Syndicate. It is an old family office out of Chicago, old money, the kind of money that buys senators and judges before they even graduate law school. The names meant nothing to me, and yet they sounded heavy, like stones dropped into a deep well. I found a discrepancy, Arthur said. I found a line of funding that went back to domestic terrorism charges that had been buried. I decided I could not do it anymore. I prepared a dossier. I was going to the SEC. I was going to the FBI. I was going to blow the whistle on my own family. Your own family? I frowned. We do not have family in Chicago. So you chose to abandon us, I said, the hurt cutting through the shock. I chose to keep you alive, he countered. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a smartphone. A burner, cheap and cracked. He tapped the screen and slid it across the coffee table toward me. Look at the date. I picked up the phone. On the screen was a photo of Arthur. He was standing in front of a roadside diner, holding up a copy of the Albuquerque Journal. He looked terrible in the picture, unshaven, terrified, wearing clothes I did not recognize. But it was him. I swiped up to view the metadata. As a reporter, this was muscle memory. Dates and locations could be faked on the surface, but the EXIF data was harder to scrub if you did not know what you were doing. The date of the photo was October 12th, 4 years ago. My father's funeral had been on October 10th. The phone slipped from my fingers and landed on the rug with a dull thud. The timeline in my head, the solid foundation of my past 4 years, shattered. If this is true, I said, my voice barely a whisper, then Miles knew. Miles handled the police report. Miles handled the coroner. I asked to see the accident report, and he told me no. He told me it would only hurt me. He and Mom. They blocked me at every turn. Elaine knew, Arthur said softly. She had to know. She was the one who made me leave. But Miles. He hesitated, a shadow crossing his face. Miles is complicated. I stood up and paced the small length of my living room. My mind was racing, connecting dots I had previously ignored. After the funeral, my career had taken a sharp turn. I had been working toward a position at a major financial news network in New York. I wanted to cover Wall Street. I wanted to chase the big money. But after Dad died, Miles had sat me down. He had been so gentle, so protective. You are too fragile right now. Sarah, he had said, stay in Cleveland, work on your own terms, do the indie stuff. Do not get chewed up by the corporate machine. I had thought he was looking out for my mental health. I had thought he was being a good brother. He steered me, I said, stopping in front of the window. Miles, he encouraged me to go freelance. He told me to focus on local interest stories. He kept me away from the big financial investigations. He was keeping you in the dark, Arthur said. They needed a daughter who knew nothing, A grieving, harmless artist type. As long as you were irrelevant, you were safe. So what changed? I asked, turning back to him. Why are you here tonight? Arthur pointed at my closed laptop. Your new episode, the one you are editing right now. You are covering the shadow funding behind the gentrification project in East Cleveland, right? I nodded slowly. It is a standard corruption piece. City council taking kickbacks. It is not standard, Arthur said grimly. The shell company buying that land is a subsidiary of Orion Crest. You traced the money back too far. Sarah, you pinged their network yesterday morning. A flag went up in the Chicago office. They know who you are. They know you are my daughter, and they have decided that the truce is over. He stood up, and for the first time, I realized how tall he was. He took up so much space in my small life. They are not coming to warn you, he said. They are coming to clean up the mess. The second death has been scheduled, and this time, they will not use a fake body. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 1:30 in the morning. My instinct was to deny it. My instinct was to scream that this was insane, that my brother loved me, that my father was a liar. But the scar was real, the metadata was real, and the cold. Logical part of my brain, the part that made me a good reporter, knew that the story made sense. It explained the closed casket, it explained the missing paperwork, it explained why Miles had been so adamant that I stay small. I need to call him, I said. Sarah, do not, Arthur warned. I need to know, I said. If Miles is part of this, if he knows you are alive, I need to hear his voice. I grabbed my own phone from the desk. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped it. I pulled up Miles's contact. His face smiled back at me from the screen. A selfie we took at a baseball game last summer. He looked so normal, so safe. I pressed the call button. I put the phone to my ear. The silence in the apartment was thick, suffocating. Brr ring. Brr ring. It rang twice. Then, there was a sharp click. The ringing stopped. Silence. Then, the harsh, rapid pulse of a busy signal. Beep, 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 beep. He had declined the call. It was 1:30 in the morning. Miles was a light sleeper. If I called him this late, he would assume it was an emergency. He would answer. He always answered, unless he was sitting by his phone, waiting for it to ring, and deciding that he could not talk to me. Or unless he was already on the phone with someone else, discussing a problem, discussing a cleanup. I lowered the phone slowly. The busy signal whined in the air like a flat line. I looked at Arthur. He did not say I told you so. He just looked at the door, his body tense, ready for violence. We have to go, I said, the reality finally settling into my bones like lead. Right now, by the time the sun began to bleed a pale, watery gray through my blinds, I had stopped shaking and started working. My apartment had transformed from a home into a war room. I had drawn the curtains tight. I had disconnected my router. My phone was powered down and shoved into the microwave, a makeshift Faraday cage that Arthur insisted upon. I sat across from him at the kitchen table. Between us lay a digital voice recorder, its small red light blinking a steady rhythm. I was not just a daughter anymore. I was a journalist documenting the most dangerous source I had ever interviewed. I had taken photos of him, profile, front, the scar on his chin, his hands, and offloaded them onto an encrypted offline hard drive. State your name, I said. My voice sounded flat, detached. It was a defense mechanism. Arthur Snow, he said. Then he paused, rubbing his face with a hand that trembled slightly. No, that is not true. My name is Arthur Vale. I stared at him. Vale? Like the Chicago Vales? The very same, he said. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. I knew the name Vale. Anyone who paid attention to the deep currents of American finance knew it. They were not the loud billionaires who bought social media companies or launched rockets. They were the quiet money, the old money, the kind of money that built the foundations of skyscrapers and then charged rent to the steel and glass. They were the Vale and Harrow Syndicate. I tried to call Aunt Marge in Denver, I said, testing him. And Cousin Pete. I used the burner phone. The numbers are disconnected. They were never connected to begin with. Sarah, Arthur said, his voice heavy with fatigue. Marge and Pete were actors. They were payroll employees of a shell company I set up 20 years ago to give you a sense of extended family. They sent Christmas cards because I paid them to. When I went underground 4 years ago, I stopped the payments. They stopped existing. I leaned back, the plastic chair digging into my spine, my childhood summers, the birthday cards, the distant cousins I never met because of scheduling conflicts. It was all a fabrication, a stage set built to convince me I was normal. Why? I asked. Because I was born the second son of the Vale dynasty, Arthur said. And in that family, you do not just leave, you escape. He began to talk, and for the next hour, he dismantled my entire understanding of who I was. He told me about growing up in a fortress in Lake Forest, Illinois. He told me about a family business that treated the global economy like a private casino. The syndicate owned hedge funds, sure, but they also owned private intelligence firms, shipping logistics for gray market weapons, and a network of charitable foundations that moved dark money across borders without triggering a single audit. I met your mother in a coffee shop in 1988, Arthur said, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. Elaine she was so light. She had no agenda. She did not care about the stock market. She wanted to be a teacher. When I told my father I wanted to marry her, he gave me an ultimatum. I could marry her, but I would have to sign the separation agreement. The what? A contract, he said. I had to legally change my name. I had to move at least 500 miles away from Chicago. I had to renounce all claims to the trust. And most importantly, I was forbidden from ever telling my children where they came from. If I broke the silence, I lost the protection. Memories flashed through my mind like a slideshow. I remembered being 12 years old and wanting to join Facebook. Dad had forbidden it. He had terrified me with stories of kidnappers and identity thieves. I remembered how he never let us put family photos in the local newspaper when I made the honor roll. I remembered how he would scan the crowd at my piano recitals, his eyes never watching me, always watching the exits. I thought you were just paranoid, I whispered. I thought you were a control freak. I was terrified, he corrected. I knew what they were capable of, but I broke the deal. Sarah, I got comfortable. I started working at Orion Crest because I thought I could do some good from the inside of the industry, but then I saw the patterns. Orion was funneling money for the syndicate. I was inadvertently washing my own family's dirty cash. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a high-resolution scan of a legal document, yellowed with age. He pushed it across the table. I stole this before I staged the accident, he said. I looked at the legalese. It was dense, archaic, and brutal. But one paragraph stood out. It was partially redacted with thick black marker, but the header was clear. Succession and reintegration clause. Read it, Arthur commanded. I squinted at the text. Any issue born of the separated party shall have no claim to the estate, nor recognition within the trust. I stopped. The next lines were blacked out. It says, Arthur recited from memory, his voice turning hard, unless said issue proves useful to the syndicate's long-term preservation and is brought back into the fold by a sponsoring member. I looked up at him. Useful? We are human beings, not assets. To them, everyone is an asset or a liability, Arthur said. That is why I had to die. Sarah, 4 years ago, I found out they were watching you, and I heard them talking to Miles. The name hung in the air between us. Miles, my baby brother, the one who brought me soup when I had the flu, the one who handled the funeral arrangements so I would not have to look at the paperwork. You think Miles is with them? I asked. The denial was automatic, but it was weaker than before. I was in the boardroom vent system, listening. Arthur said, 2 days before the crash, I heard the chairman, my uncle, saying that the son showed promise, that he was malleable, that he understood the necessity of cleaning the slate. And then I heard Miles's voice, He was asking about the compensation package. I felt sick. He sold you out. He made a choice, Arthur said. Just like I did. But he chose the money. When I staged the crash, I hoped it would cut the cord. I hoped if I was dead, they would leave you alone. I thought Miles would protect you out of guilt. He did protect me, I said, my mind racing back to the last 4 years. He told me to quit my job at the network. He told me to stay independent. He told me to keep my head down. He was neutralizing you, Arthur said. He was keeping you in a holding pattern, a pawn on the board that they could use later if they needed a clean face for a dirty operation. Or, he looked at me with profound sadness. Or a sacrifice if you became a problem. And with your podcast, Sarah, you became a problem. I stood up and walked to the sink. I needed water. My mouth felt like it was full of sand. I was not just a reporter investigating a story anymore. I was a character in a script I hadn't known I was reading. I was the issue in the contract. What about Mom? I asked, turning back to him. Did she know about the syndicate? Arthur hesitated. She knew I had secrets. She knew we were running from a rich family, but she didn't know the extent of the violence. So she died of a stroke, I said. That part is true, right? Miles called me from the hospital. He was crying. He sent me the cremation certificate. Arthur shook his head slowly. Sarah, think. Did you see the body? No, I said defensively. I was in New York for an interview. By the time I flew back, Miles said, he said the hospital had already released her to the funeral home, and per her wishes, she was cremated immediately. Elaine was Catholic, Arthur said softly. She never wanted to be cremated. The glass in my hand slipped. I caught it before it hit the counter, but water splashed over my wrist. She is alive? I asked, my voice barely audible. She is not dead, Arthur said. But she is not free. The syndicate has a charitable arm called the Aurora Wellness Foundation. They run high-end memory care facilities, very exclusive, very secure. It is where they put family members who know too much, but whom they cannot kill for public relations reasons. It is a prison with 5-star room service. She has been there for 2 years? I screamed, the sound tearing out of my throat. Alone? Thinking we are both dead? She thinks I am dead, Arthur said. She probably thinks you are busy with your career. They control her information. They drug her. They keep her compliant. We have to go, I said. I grabbed my keys from the hook. The fear was gone, replaced by a white-hot rage that clarified everything. Tell me where this facility is. We are going to get her. Arthur stood up and blocked my path to the door. No. Get out of my way, I snarled. That is my mother. And if you walk into that facility now, Arthur said, his voice steel, you will never walk out. They have security teams that make the Secret Service look like mall cops. You have a pepper spray and a microphone. They have semi-automatic weapons and legal immunity. So we just leave her there? We get leverage, Arthur said. We cannot fight them with guns. We have to fight them with the one thing they fear: exposure, evidence, the kind that destroys stock prices and puts billionaires in handcuffs. You said you had a dossier, I said, the one you made before the accident. I hid it, Arthur said. I split it up. I knew if I kept it on me, they would find it eventually. I hid the first half, but your mother, she hid the second half. I frowned. Mom, you said she didn't know the extent of it. She knew enough to be scared, Arthur said. Before I disappeared, I gave her a key. I told her to put it somewhere safe, somewhere only she and I and you would understand. I do not know where she put it, but I know where I put mine. He stepped closer to me, his eyes searching my face. It is not in a bank, Sarah. It is not in a storage locker. It is woven into the life I built for us. It is in the memories. He looked at me with an intensity that made me want to look away. We need to leave Cleveland, he said. We need to go to the cabin in Pennsylvania, the one I rented for that summer when you were 10. Do you remember it? The one where we got lost hiking, I asked. The one where you learned how to read a compass, he corrected. There is a contact waiting for us there. A woman named Rosa. She was the head of security for the syndicate before she defected. She is the only reason I'm still alive, and she is the only one who can help us get into Aurora Wellness." I looked at the recorder on the table, the red light still blinking. I looked at the scanned contract with its blacked-out clauses. My family was a lie. My brother was a traitor. My mother was a prisoner, and my father was a ghost. "Fine," I said. "We go to the cabin. But Arthur?" He looked at me, startled by the use of his first name. "If we get Mom out," I said, "and I find out you are holding anything else back, any other secrets about Miles, or the syndicate, or me—" I picked up the hard drive containing the photos and the recording. "I will burn you down with them," I said. "I am not your asset. I am the press." Arthur looked at me, and for the first time since he had knocked on my door, he looked genuinely afraid, not of the assassins coming to kill us, but of me. "I know," he said. "That is why I came to you. The first rule of going dark is that you leave your digital soul behind." Arthur stood by the kitchen counter, watching as I placed my smartphone, my laptop, and my smartwatch into the microwave. It felt like an amputation. For a journalist, these were not just tools. They were my memory, my connection to the world, my shield. Without them, I was just a woman in a room with a dead man. "Do not turn it on," Arthur said, his voice low. "Just leave them. The Faraday effect will kill the signal." I nodded, grabbing the only piece of tech he allowed, a heavy brick-like analog tape recorder I had bought at a garage sale years ago for aesthetic reasons. I checked the cassette. It had 60 minutes of magnetic tape per side. No cloud backups, no GPS tracking, just rust and plastic. We left my apartment through the fire escape, descending into the alleyway where a battered Ford pickup truck was idling. It was rusted around the wheel wells and smelled of gasoline and wet dog, a vehicle that was invisible because it was so ugly. As we merged onto the highway, heading east toward the Pennsylvania border, the city lights of Cleveland began to fade in the rearview mirror. The silence in the cab was thick. I pressed the record button on the tape player and set it on the dashboard. The small wheels hissed as they began to turn. "Talk," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Who is Rosa King?" Arthur lit a cigarette, a habit I did not remember him having. The flare of the lighter illuminated the hollows of his cheeks. Rosa was the head of internal security for the syndicate. For 20 years, she was the person they called when an executive got arrested for DUI, or when a mistress threatened to go to the press. She cleaned things up. "And now she is helping us?" I asked, skeptical. "Why?" "Because 3 years ago, the board ordered a cleaning that involved a school bus," Arthur said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "It was collateral damage for a logistics problem they wanted to solve. Rosa refused. She scrubbed her own files and vanished before they could terminate her. She reached out to me because she knew I was the only other person who had successfully played dead." I glanced at him in the mirror. In the harsh sodium light of the passing street lamps, he looked less like my father and more like a fugitive. His eyes were constantly scanning the side mirrors, his hand resting near his hip, where I suspected he had a weapon. I realized I was documenting a stranger. The man who had taught me to ride a bike was gone, replaced by this hardened survivor who spoke of cleanings and terminations as if they were weather reports. We drove for 4 hours. The landscape shifted from the industrial decay of the Rust Belt to the dense, oppressive darkness of the Pennsylvania woodlands. The road narrowed, turning from asphalt to gravel, and finally to a dirt track that wound its way up a steep incline. The trees here were ancient and thick, blocking out the moon. The cabin appeared suddenly in the headlights. It was a rough-hewn structure made of dark timber, squatting in a clearing that felt miles away from civilization. There were no power lines running to it, no mailbox. It was a ghost house. Arthur killed the engine. "Leave the lights off," he commanded. We stepped out into the biting cold. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Before I could adjust to the darkness, the front door of the cabin opened. A woman stood in the frame, backlit by a kerosene lamp. She was shorter than I expected, but she held herself with the coiled tension of a viper. She wore tactical cargo pants and a thick wool sweater. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, revealing a neck and forearms covered in intricate geometric tattoos that looked less like art and more like encrypted data. "You brought the package," she said. Her voice was like sandpaper. "She is not a package, Rosa," Arthur said, stepping into the light. "She is my daughter." Rosa King stepped aside to let us in. As I passed her, her eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over me, assessing my threat level, my fitness, and my fear. It was not a welcoming look. It was a security scan. The interior of the cabin was warm, heated by a wood stove in the corner, but what grabbed my attention was not the furniture, but the far wall. It was covered in corkboard. Hundreds of photos were pinned to it, connected by strings of red and black yarn, maps of offshore banking routes, satellite photos of buildings I did not recognize, and flowcharts of shell companies. But in the center of the chaos was a cluster of photos that made my breath hitch. They were photos of me. Me buying coffee at the bodega on 4th Street, me walking into the library, me sitting on a park bench editing a script, me arguing with a source in a diner. Some were taken from across the street. Others were taken from high angles, likely from a rooftop. I walked toward the wall, my fingers trembling as I touched a photo of myself sleeping on the subway. A moment of vulnerability I did not even remember. "You have been watching me," I whispered. I turned to Arthur, anger flushing my skin. "For 4 years? You watched me grieve? You watched me fall apart?" "I was monitoring your safety," Arthur said, his voice pleading. "I hired a private security detail, ex-military. Guys Rosa knew. They were invisible. Their only job was to make sure the syndicate did not come near you." "Monitoring?" I ripped a photo off the wall. "This is stalking, Arthur." "Look at the dates, Sarah," Rosa said from the corner. She was leaning against a gun safe, cleaning a Glock with a rag. "Look when the photos stop." I looked at the timestamps printed in the corners. The most recent one was from 3 months ago. "What happened 3 months ago?" I asked. "The team went dark," Arthur said, staring at the floor. "My lead guy missed a check-in, then the second guy, then the third. No bodies were found, no distress signals. They just ceased to exist. That is when we knew the syndicate had cleared the board. They removed your protection before they decided to move on you." I dropped the photo. The realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. I had not been living a free life. I had been living in a fishbowl that was slowly being drained. Rosa pushed off the wall and walked to a table covered in maps. She picked up a small, heavy steel box, a portable safe, no larger than a hardcover book. She set it down in front of me with a heavy thud. "Arthur said you are the only one who can open this," Rosa said. "He set the combination, but he claims he does not know it." "I do not," Arthur confirmed. I had a hypnotic block placed on my memory regarding the code. It was a safeguard. If they tortured me, I could not give it up. But the trigger for the code, that is something I could never forget. He looked at me, his eyes wet. "The code is the date, Sarah, the day the water took you." My chest tightened. The memory of the lake, the weeds, the cold. It was the defining trauma of my childhood, and he had turned it into a password. 8 digits, Rosa said. "Month, day, year." My hands hovered over the keypad. I felt sick. To open this box, I had to acknowledge the moment I almost died. "August," I whispered. 12th. I pressed the keys. 0, 8, 1, 2. 1999. 1. 9. 9. 9. The mechanism whirred. A small green light blinked, and the lock disengaged with a sharp clack. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I lifted the heavy steel lid. Inside, there was no money. There were no diamonds. There was only a single silver key with a blue plastic tag and a folded piece of cream-colored stationery. I picked up the key. The tag read, "Midland Trust, Box 402. That is a bank in downtown Cleveland, I said. I pass it every day. I did not put that there, Arthur said, frowning. He moved closer, peering into the box. I left a drive, an encrypted hard drive with the second half of the dossier. Where is it? I picked up the note. The paper was high quality, the kind my mother used to write thank you notes on after dinner parties. My heart slammed against my ribs as I recognized the handwriting. It was elegant, looping script, with sharp, decisive crosses on the T's. It is from Mom, I said. Arthur froze. What? I unfolded the paper. There were only 3 sentences, written in ink that had slightly faded over time. Sarah, if you are reading this, it means your father did not make it back in time to stop them. Take the key, but do not trust the man standing next to you if his name is Vale. Mom. I read it out loud. The silence that followed was absolute. The fire in the stove crackled, a gunshot in the quiet room. I looked up at Arthur. His face had gone ashen. He looked at the note, then at me, looking like a man who had just been stabbed by a ghost. She knew, I said, my voice shaking. She knew you were coming back, and she told me not to trust you. That is impossible, Arthur stammered. Elaine, she was scared. She was confused. She sounds pretty clear to me, Rosa said. Stepping forward to look at the note, she let out a low whistle. She warned the girl about the Vales. That means you, Arthur. I looked at the note again. Do not trust the man standing next to you. My mother had not been a victim. While Arthur was playing spy, while Miles was climbing the corporate ladder, Elaine Snow had been playing a different game entirely. She had intercepted Arthur's stash. She had moved it, and she had left a breadcrumb trail that only I could follow. She beat you, I said to Arthur. You thought you were the mastermind, protecting the helpless wife and daughter, but she was 5 steps ahead of you. I gripped the silver key in my fist. The metal bit into my palm, grounding me. We are going back to Cleveland, I said. Sarah, no, Arthur protested. It is a kill zone. They are watching the banks. I do not care, I said. I grabbed the analog recorder and shoved it into my pocket. My mother left this for me, not for you. If she says the key is the answer, then I am going to the bank. I turned to Rosa. You said you want to hurt the syndicate? Rosa cracked a smile, revealing a gold tooth. More than anything. Then get your gear, I said. We are robbing a safety deposit box. Arthur stood by the table, looking at the empty safe and the note in my hand. He looked small, for the first time. I realized that in the story of our family, he might not be the hero. He might just be the reason everything fell apart. Drive the truck, Arthur, I said cold. And do not speak. I have a lot of thinking to do. We decided that I would go alone. It was a calculated risk. The kind of gamble my father would have hesitated to take, but one that Rosa insisted was necessary. Arthur was a ghost, a dead man walking who would trigger facial recognition software the moment he stepped onto a city block. Rosa was a known defector with a bounty on her head. I was just Sarah Snow, the grieving daughter, the investigative journalist who had gone quiet for a day. I was the only one who could walk through the front door of a bank without bringing down a SWAT team. I drove the battered pickup truck back into Cleveland, leaving Arthur and Rosa at the cabin with a prepaid burner phone and a strict protocol. If I did not call by noon, they were to burn the cabin and vanish. Midland Trust was a cathedral of old money, all marble floors and vaulted ceilings that amplified the sound of expensive leather shoes clicking on the stone. I walked in at 9 a.m, wearing my sharpest blazer and the kind of detached, busy expression that usually discouraged small talk. I asked to access safety deposit box 402. The bank officer, a man with a thin mustache and a name tag that read, Mr. Henderson, took my ID and the silver key. He typed into his terminal, and I saw his eyebrows knit together. The box is listed under Elaine A. Snow, he said, looking up at me over his spectacles. And you are the co-signer? I am her daughter, I said, keeping my voice steady. She passed away 2 years ago. I am the executor of the estate." Henderson nodded slowly, but his eyes stayed on the screen. "It says here the box was opened 3 months before her reported date of death. That is unusual. Usually, these accounts are frozen or transferred immediately upon the filing of a death certificate." My heart skipped a beat. "My mother liked to keep her affairs private," I said. "Is there a problem?" "No," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Just a clerical curiosity. Please, follow me." He led me into the vault, a climate-controlled room that smelled of dust and cold steel. He unlocked the customer side of box 402, then stepped back to give me privacy. I pulled the long metal drawer out and carried it to a small viewing cubicle. My hands were trembling as I set it down on the table. This was not just a box. It was a message from the grave. I flipped the lid open. There was no cash. There were no jewels. Inside, neatly organized, was a small black USB drive, a stack of medical files, a bundle of photographs held together by a rubber band, and a cream-colored envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope first. The letter was written in the same steady, looping script as the note in the cabin. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, it means the walls I built to protect you have finally crumbled. I am sorry. I wanted you to have a normal life, far away from the shadow of the veils. But I know your curiosity. I know you are your father's daughter, even if you have my heart. You think I died of a stroke? You think I am ashes in an urn on Miles's mantle. I am neither. 2 years ago, after Arthur disappeared, Miles came to me. He told me that for my own safety, I needed to go to a facility called the Lakeshore Recovery Center. He said I was showing signs of stress-induced dementia. I was not. Sarah, I was grieving, but I was sharp. I was clear. Lakeshore is not a hospital. It is a holding pen. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and fast. I wiped it away angrily and continued reading. For the first month, I fought them. But the doctors there, they are not healers. They began giving me injections. They called it cognitive stabilizers. It was a chemical fog. Sarah, it made me forget what day it was. It made me forget why I was angry. I would sit in a chair by the window for 12 hours, unable to lift my hand. But one night, they made a mistake. They increased the dosage, trying to sedate me for a transfer. A nurse, a young woman who did not belong there, switched the IV bag. She whispered to me that there were people on the outside watching. She saved my mind. And then I heard them. I was in the hallway, pretending to be asleep in my wheelchair. Miles was there. He was on the phone with someone. I heard him say, "The mother is becoming a variable. We cannot risk her snapping out of it. I will not let her ruin what we have built. Process her." I gasped. The sound loud in the small room. I had suspected Miles was compromised. Arthur had told me he was greedy. But this was monstrous. My brother had referred to our mother as a variable. He had authorized them to process her. I realized then that Arthur's way, the way of hiding, of compromising, of making deals with the devil to keep us safe, was broken. The letter continued, "You cannot negotiate with a cancer. You have to cut it out." So I started collecting. With the help of that nurse, I gathered records. I recorded conversations. I took photos. I put the letter down and picked up the stack of photos. They were grainy, taken with a hidden camera, likely a smartphone concealed in a pocket. They showed the interior of Lakeshore. It looked like a luxury hotel, but the windows were reinforced with steel mesh. The patients in the background were not elderly people with Alzheimer's. They were people in their 40s and 50s, staring blankly at walls, drooling, chemically lobotomized. I picked up the USB drive. I did not have a computer with me, but there was a printed transcript folded underneath it. I unfolded the paper. It was a transcript of a digital recording dated 6 months ago. Voice 1, male doctor. Eris. Subject, Snow is showing resistance to the current protocol. Her memory retention is increasing. Voice 2, female administrator. The syndicate is losing patience. The Aurora Wellness Initiative requires clean assets. Move her. Voice 1. Where? Voice 2. The Northern Facility, the research center near the Canadian border. We can classify her as a terminal case. No visitors, no oversight. My blood ran cold. The Northern Facility. Arthur had been right about the danger, but he had underestimated the cruelty. Then I saw the final document in the stack. It was another transcript, but this one was shorter. Voice A. Elaine. Is the line secure? Voice B. Rosa King. It is encrypted. Elaine. But we have to be quick. Arthur thinks he is protecting you by staying dead. He is wrong. Voice A. I know. He always tries to bargain. He thinks he can offer them a finger to save the hand, but they want the whole body. Rosa, if I disappear, if they move me, you have to find Sarah. Voice B. I will, but she will not trust me. She will need a reason. Voice A. I will leave her a key. When she is ready, lead her to it, but do not let Arthur control the narrative. Sarah needs to see the truth about all of us. I sat back, the room spinning. Rosa. Rosa King hadn't just helped Arthur set up the cabin. She hadn't just been a convenient ally he called upon. She had been working with my mother for months, maybe years. The suspicion in Rosa's eyes at the cabin, the way she had tested me, it was all an act. She knew exactly who I was. She was fulfilling a promise to Elaine, not Arthur. My mother hadn't been a passive victim waiting to be rescued. She had been running a counterintelligence operation from inside a psychiatric prison. She had realized that her husband's strategy of appeasement was a failure, and she had built her own weapon, me. You do not need to save me at any cost. The letter concluded. You need to save yourself and the truth. Do not let them bury us in silence. I packed everything back into the box, except for the USB and the transcripts, which I shoved into the inside pocket of my blazer. I closed the metal drawer and walked out of the vault. Did you find what you were looking for, Ms. Snow? Mr. Henderson asked, as I returned the key. Yes, I said, my voice hard and clear. I found exactly what I needed. I walked out of the bank and into the gray Cleveland morning. The city felt different now. The buildings looked like facades hiding rot. The people walking by looked like potential targets. I found a payphone on the corner of 9th and Euclid, a relic that barely worked. I dropped a handful of quarters into the slot and dialed the burner number Arthur had given me. It rang once. Status, Arthur's voice said. He sounded breathless, like he had been pacing. I have the package, I said, and I have the truth. Is it bad? He asked. It is worse than you thought, I said. And Arthur? Yes. You can stop pretending you are in charge, I said into the receiver, watching a police cruiser roll slowly past the intersection. Mom was not waiting for you to save her. She was waiting for me. She has been working with Rosa the whole time. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that happens when a man realizes his entire understanding of his marriage was a fabrication. She knew, Arthur whispered, about Rosa? She knew everything, I said. She knew Miles called her a variable. She knew you were trying to cut deals, and she decided she was done being a bargaining chip. I took a deep breath, clutching the cold handset. She is being held at an Aurora Wellness Research Facility near the Canadian border, I said. Dr. Eris is the lead. They are moving her to a terminal ward. That is a black site, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a horror-struck register. Sarah, people go there to become medical waste. Then we better drive fast, I said. I am coming back to the pickup point. But Arthur, from now on, we do exactly what I say. Mom is always one step ahead of you, and maybe, this time, I need to be ahead of both of you. I hung up the phone before he could answer. The dial tone hummed in my ear, a single note of defiance. I turned up my collar against the wind and started walking. I wasn't just a reporter anymore. I was the daughter of Elaine Snow, and I was going to burn their house down. The plan we constructed in the damp, pine-scented air of the cabin was based on a single psychological gamble. Miles Snow wanted to be the hero of his own story. He did not see himself as a villain. He saw himself as the pragmatic savior of a legacy our father was too weak to carry. To get inside, I had to let him save me. I made the call from a payphone at a truck stop just outside the Pennsylvania border. I pitched my voice a half-octave higher, injecting a tremor of exhaustion that wasn't entirely fake. I told him I was burnt out. I told him I had found some confusing medical records regarding Mom and that I was scared. I told him I was ready to stop digging and start living. "I just want to be safe, Miles," I had whispered into the receiver. "I am tired of eating ramen and fighting ghosts. I want to come home." He took the bait instantly. The relief in his voice was palpable, followed immediately by the smooth, authoritative tone of a man who solves problems. He told me to come to Chicago. He had a position for me. He called it media consultancy for the firm's internal investment group. 12 hours later, I was standing in the lobby of the Vail and Harrow Syndicate headquarters in downtown Chicago. The building was a monolith of black glass and steel that seemed to suck the light out of the surrounding skyline. The lobby smelled of ozone and expensive lilies, the same smell from Dad's funeral. The floor was polished marble, so reflective that I felt like I was walking on water, and there, etched into a frosted glass wall behind the reception desk, was a logo I recognized. A gentle, pastel swirl of blue and green. Aurora Wellness Foundation. It was right there in the open, a charitable badge of honor pinned to the chest of a monster. "Sarah!" I turned to see Miles striding toward me across the lobby. He looked immaculate. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored to within an inch of its life. He had filled out in the 4 years since I last saw him. The softness of his jaw was gone, replaced by a rigid, corporate hardness, but his smile was the same, the bright, disarming smile of the little brother who used to beg me to play video games with him. He pulled me into a hug. It was tight, too tight. It felt less like an embrace and more like a restraint. "I am so glad you are here," he murmured into my hair. "You have no idea how worried I have been." "I missed you, Miles," I lied. The words tasted like ash. I could feel the cold metal of the hidden recorder taped to the underside of my bra, pressing against my ribs. "Come on," he said, releasing me but keeping a hand firmly on my elbow. "I want you to meet the family." He swiped a black key card at the elevator bank, and we shot up to the 45th floor. The executive level was a hush of thick carpet and hushed voices. Miles led me into a conference room that overlooked Lake Michigan. Standing by the window was a man who looked like a younger, sharper version of Arthur. "Sarah, this is Derek Vail," Miles said, gesturing with a flourish. "Our cousin, and the future CEO of the syndicate." Derek turned. He was handsome in a reptilian sort of way, with pale eyes that seemed to strip me down to my net worth. He did not offer a hand to shake. Instead, he just nodded, assessing me. "So this is the prodigal daughter," Derek said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Miles says you have a talent for digging up dirt. We prefer to think of it as risk assessment." "I am done with dirt," I said, channeling the defeated woman I had practiced being in the mirror. "I just want a paycheck and a quiet life. Miles said you might have use for someone who knows how the media thinks." Derek smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We shall see. The blood is good. At least, you have the Vail chin." We went to lunch in the firm's private dining room, over plates of seared scallops that cost more than my rent. Miles began to peel back the curtain. He did not speak of crimes. He spoke of necessities. He spoke of macroeconomic stability. "Dad never understood the big picture," Miles said, cutting his food with surgical precision. "He was an idealist. He thought you could run a global empire with the morals of a Sunday school teacher. When the accident happened, honestly, Sarah, it was a tragedy, but it was also a correction. The firm needed leadership that was willing to do the hard things." I took a sip of water to wash down the bile rising in my throat. "Is that why you never let me see the police reports? To protect his reputation?" "To protect you," Miles said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. His palm was clammy. Arthur was messy. He was making threats he couldn't back up. I didn't want you to see him as a failure. I wanted you to remember him as a hero. Plus, the settlement we got. It secured your future. Sarah, why do you think you never had student loans? Why do you think your rent was always manageable? I was supplementing your accounts for years. I froze. I had always thought I was just good at budgeting. The idea that Miles had been dripping blood money into my bank account without my knowledge made my skin crawl. Thank you, I managed to say. I was ungrateful. You were grieving, Miles said dismissively. But now you are here. We need someone to manage the narrative for Aurora. There are some persistent rumors about our facilities. We need a friendly face to debunk them, a journalist's face. He slid a thick document across the table. Non-disclosure and exclusivity agreement. Standard paperwork, he said. Sign this, and your salary starts at $200,000 a year, plus bonuses. I picked up the pen. I pretended to skim the pages, but my eyes were scanning for keywords Rosa had told me to look for. On page 14, buried in a paragraph about employee benefits, I found it. The company reserves the right to mandate internal health management for any employee or contractor deemed a security risk due to psychological instability. Said management will be conducted exclusively at syndicate-approved facilities. It was the trap. It was the exact legal mechanism they had used to imprison my mother. If I signed this, and if I ever stepped out of line, they could legally lock me up in Aurora Wellness and throw away the key. I signed it. Welcome to the family, Derek said, raising his wine glass. I need to use the ladies' room, I said, standing up. Nerves. Down the hall, to the left, Miles said. As soon as I was out of their sight, I pulled out the burner phone Rosa had synced with the building's guest Wi-Fi. I slipped into a maintenance closet near the restrooms and tapped the earpiece I had hidden behind my hair. I am in, I whispered. I signed the papers. They gave me a temporary contractor badge. Good. Rosa's voice crackled in my ear. That badge has low-level clearance, but it will get you onto the server floor if you take the service elevator. I am looping the camera feed now. You have 3 minutes before the guard makes his rounds. I moved fast. The service elevator took me down to the 32nd floor. The hallway here was cold and hummed with the sound of massive cooling fans. I swiped my badge at the door marked Communications, Server Access. It beeped red. It is not working, I hissed. Try it again, Rosa commanded. I am brute forcing the permission update from here, now. I swiped again. The light turned green. I slipped inside. The room was a forest of blinking server racks. I found an unattended terminal in the corner and plugged in the USB drive Rosa had given me. It was designed to scrape data automatically. While the bar loaded, I heard voices. I ducked behind a row of servers. Through the mesh of the rack, I saw Derek Vale walking with a man in a lab coat. The timeline has accelerated, Derek was saying. The daughter is here. We have her contained. But Miles is soft. He thinks he can turn her. I do not want to take the risk. Subject Elaine Snow is ready for transport, the man in the lab coat said. We have sedated her. The plane for the northern facility leaves in 72 hours. Make it 48, Derek said. Once she crosses the border into Canada, she legally ceases to exist. We can harvest the memory data and dispose of the shell. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a scream. Dispose of the shell. They were talking about my mother like she was a used car. And Arthur? The doctor asked. He is a ghost, Derek scoffed. If he shows his face, he dies. He knows the terms of his settlement. They walked out. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The upload on the screen hit 100%. I yanked the drive out. But before I left, curiosity got the better of me. Derek had mentioned a settlement. Arthur had told me he ran away. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I searched the internal archive for Arthur Vale. Most of the files were restricted, but one email from 2 years ago was flagged as Legacy Legal. I opened it. From Arthur. Vale, secure mail. Net to board at Vale Harrow. Date, November 3rd, 2 years ago. Subject, settlement terms, adjustment. I will provide the additional encryption keys for the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. In exchange, you agree to extend the non-aggression pact regarding Sarah Snow for another 24 months. I will remain silent. I will not release the dossier. Just leave her alone. I stared at the screen, the white text burning into my retinas. Arthur had lied. He told me he had been hiding, completely cut off, preparing to fight them, but he hadn't. 2 years ago, around the same time Mom was fighting for her life in that hospital, Arthur was trading secrets with the enemy. He was giving them access to illegal money in exchange for my safety. He had bought my freedom by helping them commit more crimes, and he had kept the dossier hidden not just to protect himself, but because it was his only currency. "Sarah," Rosa's voice barked in my ear. "Get out. Now. Miles is looking for you." I closed the window. I pulled my jacket tight around me. I walked back to the elevator, my mind reeling. I was standing in a building made of lies. The syndicate lied about their business. Miles lied about his love. And Arthur had lied about his war. I stepped out onto the executive floor, composing my face into a mask of vapid gratitude. Miles was waiting by the dining room door, looking slightly annoyed. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Just touching up my makeup. I want to look my best for my first day." "That is my girl," Miles said, patting my shoulder. I looked at him. I looked at the cousin who wanted to harvest my mother, and I thought about the father who had traded his integrity to keep me in a cage. I was done being the girl. I was done being the daughter. "When do I start?" I asked. "Tomorrow," Miles said. "Great," I said. "I cannot wait." I walked away from them toward the elevator, clutching my purse. I had 48 hours to stop a murder, and I was the only person on Earth who knew that everyone involved was a traitor. The drive back to the Pennsylvania cabin took 4 hours, and I spent every minute of it letting my anger harden into something cold and useful. When I pulled the truck up the gravel path, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows through the pine trees. I walked inside. Arthur and Rosa were sitting by the wood stove. Arthur looked up, relief washing over his face when he saw me, but it died instantly when he saw the expression on mine. I did not say hello. I did not take off my coat. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the crumpled printout of the email I had stolen from the syndicate server, and slammed it onto the wooden table between us. "November 3rd, I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. 2 years ago. Explain it." Arthur looked at the paper. He did not need to pick it up. He knew what it was. The color drained from his face, leaving the scar on his chin looking like a jagged white canyon. "Sarah," he started, his voice cracking, "you were not supposed to see that." "I was not supposed to see a lot of things," I said. "I was not supposed to see Mom in a psychiatric prison. I was not supposed to see that my brother is a monster. And I was definitely not supposed to see that my father, the great martyr who died to protect his family, was actually cutting deals with the people trying to kill us." I leaned over the table, bracing my hands on the wood. "You told me you ran away," I hissed. "You told me you went dark, but you didn't. You emailed the board. You offered them encryption keys. You offered them names. What did you trade? Arthur? Who did you sell to buy that non-aggression pact?" Arthur looked down at his hands. "I traded leverage, small things, accounts that were already compromised, names of mid-level enforcers who were expendable." "Expendable to whom?" I demanded. "To the syndicate," Arthur shouted, finally looking at me. "I gave them the rot to save the root. I had to. Sarah, they were closing in. They had a team in Cleveland. They were watching you at the grocery store. I had to give them a win so they would back off." "And who paid for that win?" Rosa stood up from her corner. She walked to the wall of photos and pulled down 3 pictures. She tossed them onto the table next to the email. "David Halloway," Rosa said, pointing to a man in glasses. "Auditor. Found dead in a hotel room in Belize 2 weeks after Arthur sent that email. Ruled a suicide." She pointed to the next one. Elena Ruiz, paralegal, disappeared from her apartment in Chicago, never found. She pointed to the third. Marcus Dean. He was the witness Arthur was grooming to go to the SEC. He died in a hit-and-run in D.C. a month later. I looked at the faces. They were normal people. People with families. People who probably thought they were doing the right thing by talking to Arthur Vale. You gave them up, I said, staring at my father. I did not give them the names directly, Arthur pleaded. I gave the syndicate the keys to the accounts those people managed. I thought the syndicate would just move the money and fire them. I did not think they would scrub the whole department. You knew what they were, I said. You grew up in that house. You knew exactly what they would do. Arthur slumped in his chair. He looked small, defeated. I just wanted you to be safe. That was the only variable that mattered to me. I am not brave like you. Sarah, I am not a warrior like your mother. I am a compliance officer. I look for the path of least resistance. And that path is paved with bodies, I said. I looked at him, and the heartbreaking thing was that I believed him. He loved me. He loved me enough to let 3 strangers die so I could keep recording my little podcast in peace. It was a twisted, selfish, terrifying kind of love. And that is why Mom stopped trusting you, I said. Arthur flinched as if I had struck him. She figured it out, I continued. She knew you would always try to negotiate. She knew you would always think there was a middle ground where we could survive if we just gave them a little bit of what they wanted. But Mom knew the truth. You cannot feed a shark a little bit of your leg and expect it to stop eating. I walked over to the safe Rosa had given me and pulled out the hard drive from the bank, the one containing my mother's evidence. Then I turned to Arthur. Give me your drive, I said. Sarah, he warned, if you combine those files, if you put the financial records together with the medical records and the personnel files, you create a nuclear bomb. There is no coming back from that. They will hunt us to the ends of the earth. They are already hunting us, I said. Give it to me. He hesitated. His hand went to his jacket pocket. For a second, I thought he was going to refuse. I thought he was going to try to be the father one last time, to take the dangerous toy away from the child. But then he looked at Rosa. She gave him a slow, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She was done with his half measures too. Arthur pulled a ruggedized black drive from his pocket and slid it across the table. I took it. I sat down at the table and pulled the analog recorder out of my pocket. I set it down, but I did not turn it on. This part was not for history. This was for survival. Here is what is going to happen, I said. I am not choosing your way. Dad, I am not going to negotiate for a safe house or a payoff, and I am not choosing Mom's way entirely either. She wanted to be a martyr. She was ready to die in that facility to get the truth out. I looked at both of them. I am choosing the third option. I am going to use everyone. I am going to use Miles's arrogance. I am going to use the syndicate's paranoia. And I am going to use you. I pulled a laptop out of Rosa's supply bag, a clean machine she kept for emergencies. I plugged both drives in. I am merging the data, I said, my fingers flying across the keys. I am building a master timeline, every dollar laundered, every patient drugged, every witness murdered, and I am not just going to dump it on the internet where they can scrub it in 5 minutes. I looked at the screen as the progress bar crawled forward. I am encrypting it into shards, I explained. I am burying pieces of this file in servers all over the world, in the metadata of my old podcast episodes, in the comment sections of cooking blogs, in the code of indie video games. It is going to be everywhere and nowhere. A dead man's switch, Rosa noted with approval. Exactly, I said. If I do not enter a code every 24 hours, the keys publish themselves, and every major news outlet, the FBI, and The Hague gets a copy. Arthur watched me, his eyes wide. He looked like he was seeing a stranger. You learned this from me? No, I said. I learned the tech from you. I learned the will to use it from Mom. The transfer finished. I pulled the drives. Tomorrow, we go back to Chicago, I said. I am going to show up for my first day of work. I am going to smile at Miles. I am going to sign their forms. I am going to let them think they have won. No, I said. It is a distraction. While I keep Miles busy feeling like a big man, you and Rosa are going to the northern facility. You are going to get the physical proof. You are going to get Mom. They will be expecting me, Arthur said. They will be expecting the Arthur Vale who negotiates, I said. They will be expecting the man who sends emails asking for terms. They won't be expecting a man who has nothing left to lose because his daughter just took away his only bargaining chip. I held up the merged drive. This is it. Dad, I have the leverage now. You have nothing to trade. If you want to save me, you have to save Mom. That is the only deal on the table. Arthur stood up slowly. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark forest. He looked older than he had yesterday. The weight of his failures, of the people he had sacrificed, seemed to be crushing his shoulders. But when he turned back, there was something else in his eyes, a spark of the anger I needed to see. You are terrifying, he said softly. I am a Snow, I said. We survive. I stood up and put the drive in my bra, right next to the wire. I walked over to him. I was shorter than him, but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. I love you, Dad, I said, and I meant it. But if I have to choose between saving you or keeping the promise I made to Mom's letter, if I have to choose between your safety and the truth, I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. I will choose Mom, I said, and I will not apologize for it. Arthur nodded slowly. He understood. The torch had not just been passed, it had been seized. Get some sleep, Rosa said, breaking the tension. We leave at 0400. I turned and walked into the small bedroom at the back of the cabin. I lay down on the cot, fully clothed, clutching the hard drive against my chest. I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind, counting the hours until I had to walk back into the lion's den and smile. The red recording light on the digital console was the only thing that felt honest in the room. I sat across from Miles in a soundproofed media suite on the 45th floor of the Vale and Harrow headquarters. We were ostensibly recording a pilot episode for the Aurora Standard, an internal podcast designed to boost morale and clarify the Foundation's mission to the lower-level employees. In reality, I was hunting. It is about stewardship, Miles said, leaning into the microphone. He had that relaxed, expansive posture of a man who owned the building. People think finance is just math. It is not. It is biology. You have to prune the dead branches so the tree can survive. I nodded, keeping my face full of sisterly admiration. I adjusted the levels on the mixing board. That is a powerful image, Miles, but some of the staff I have spoken to, they find the pruning process difficult, specifically regarding the long-term residents at the wellness centers. How do you handle the emotional weight of those decisions? Miles smiled, a little sad, a little patronizing. He took a sip of water. It is heavy. Sarah, of course it is, but you have to detach. Take the legacy cases. Sometimes, you have a patient who, let us say, their continued presence becomes a toxicity to the ecosystem, a risk. As a leader, you cannot be sentimental. You have to ask yourself if keeping one person comfortable is worth risking the stability of the entire fund. So you make the call? I asked Softy. Personally? Always, Miles said. His ego was swelling now, filling the room. He wanted to impress me. He wanted to show his big sister that he was not the baby anymore. There is a line on the intake forms, Code Black. It authorizes total administrative discretion. When I sign that line, the file is closed. The patient is resolved. It is a mercy, really, for them and for us. Resolved. I felt a cold shiver trace down my spine. He was talking about murder. He was talking about our mother. And he was doing it with the calm self-assurance of a man ordering a sandwich. That is incredibly brave of you, Miles, I said, to take that burden on yourself. Someone has to, he said. I cut the recording. That was perfect. I think we have the soundbite for the trailer. You are a natural at this, Miles said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. I knew you would fit in. Listen, I have a board meeting. You have access to the editing bay? I have everything I need, I said. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, I exported the file. I did not edit it. I isolated the clip where he admitted to resolving patients who became a risk. Then I opened a secure browser. The first packet of data, the clean version, the one that looked like a whistleblower tip from a disgruntled accountant, was already sitting in the draft folder of an anonymous email account. I attached the audio file. Destination: the FBI Field Office, White Collar Crimes Division, St. Louis, Missouri. I hit send. The digital clock on the wall read 2 in the afternoon. The fuse was lit. In St. Louis, an agent was about to receive a map connecting Orion Crest, Vale and Harrow, and the Aurora Wellness Foundation into a single criminal enterprise. But I was not done. I left the building, flashing my badge at security, and walked 3 blocks to a crowded Starbucks. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled out the burner phone to check in with the team. Arthur was supposed to be in a meeting with a contact at the Palmer House Hotel, a decoy meeting designed to make the syndicate think he was in town trying to sell his silence for a pension, drawing their eyes away from the northern border. I dialed Rosa. Is he safe? I asked when she picked up. He is back at the rendezvous point, Rosa said. Her voice was not relieved. It was tight, furious. But we have a problem, Sarah, a big one. Did he get made? No, Rosa said. He got busy. I was monitoring the encrypted traffic from the cabin's server. I found an unauthorized outbound transmission sent 2 hours ago. It was routed through a proxy, but I traced the source. It was Arthur's laptop. My stomach dropped. What did he send? He sent the plan, Rosa said. Not the whole thing, a summary. He sent it to an encrypted address belonging to Thomas Vale. Uncle Thomas? I asked, my mind racing. The one on the board of directors? The one Arthur calls the moderate, Rosa spat. He sent a message offering to trade the location of your data shards in exchange for a guarantee of safety for you and immediate medical release for Elaine. He tried to cut a side deal. Sarah, again. I closed my eyes. I leaned my forehead against the cool tile of the bathroom wall. I was not surprised. That was the tragedy of it. I was just tired. Where is he? I asked. He is in the van, Rosa said. I have him zip-tied. I was about to put a bullet in his leg, but I thought you should have the honors. Do not shoot him, I said. I am coming. I took a taxi to the lower level of Wacker Drive, a subterranean street system that felt like the bowels of the city. Rosa was parked in a gray utility van in a shadow between 2 pillars. I slid the side door open. Arthur was sitting on the floor of the van, his hands bound with plastic ties. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. I did it for you. He started immediately. Thomas is not like Derek. Thomas and I grew up together. He hates the violence. If I gave him the data locations, he could use it to force Derek out. It would trigger an internal coup. The syndicate would be too busy fighting itself to hunt us. You gave them the map, I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. You told them I have the data rigged to blow, and you told them how to defuse it. I told them I would give them the key only after Elaine was safe, Arthur cried. It is a trade, Sarah. It is the only way to get her out without a firefight. You idiot, I whispered. You do not trade with these people. You destroy them. You just told them that the gun I am holding to their head is real, and worse. You told them that you are the one holding the safety catch. You just made yourself the most valuable hostage in the world. Arthur shook his head. Thomas gave me his word. Thomas is a Vale, I said, and so are you. I looked at Rosa. Cut him loose. Sarah? Rosa asked, confused. Cut him loose and kick him out, I said. He is done. He is not part of this team anymore. He is a liability. Sarah, you cannot, Arthur begged, struggling against the ties. They will kill me out here. Then you better start running, I said, because I am done saving you. I am done watching you sell out my mother to buy yourself a feeling of control. Rosa sliced the ties with a knife. She shoved Arthur toward the door. He stumbled out onto the concrete, looking back at me with a mixture of horror and heartbreak. Go, I said. He stood there for a second, then turned and vanished into the shadows of the underpass. I slammed the van door shut. The silence in the vehicle was heavy. That was cold, Rosa said. She sounded impressed. He compromised the operation, I said, my hands shaking slightly. Now we have to move fast. If Thomas Vale has that summary, the syndicate knows we are coming for the northern facility. The element of surprise is gone. It is worse than that, Rosa said. If they know we are coming, they will move Elaine, or they will liquidate her. My phone, the burner I was holding, rang. It was not a number I recognized. It was a blocked ID. I looked at Rosa. She drew her weapon, signaling me to answer it on speaker. I pressed the button. This is Sarah. Hello? Sarah? A woman's voice said. It was crisp, professional, and sounded like it was coming from inside a wind tunnel. My name is Dr. Lila Monroe. I am the senior investigator for the Aurora Wellness Internal Review Board. I froze. I have nothing to say to you. You should, she said, because I know about the file you just sent to St. Louis, and I know about the email your father just sent to Thomas Vale. My grip on the phone tightened. Who are you? I am the person staring at the order to terminate patient 0, she said. That is what they call your mother here, patient 0. I stopped breathing. Thomas Vale did not use your father's intel to start a coup. Dr. May Monroe continued. He took it straight to Derek. They are scrubbing the servers, and they have ordered the immediate sanitization of the northern facility. That means no witnesses, no patients. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I signed up to cure Alzheimer's, not to be an executioner, she said. Her voice wavered, just for a second. I am looking at Elaine Snow right now. She is sedated, but she is alive. If you want her to stay that way, you have 24 hours. It is a trap, Rosa whispered. Of course it is a trap, Dr. Monroe said. Hearing her, Derek knows you are coming. He wants you to come. He wants to end this in one clean sweep. He is betting that you love your mother enough to walk into a kill box. And what is your angle? I asked. I can get you in the front door, Monroe said. I can disable the perimeter alarm for 3 minutes. That is all I can do. If you are not here by tomorrow night, there will be nothing left to save. She hung up. I stared at the phone. The screen went black. We cannot go, Rosa said. They are waiting for us. It is suicide. It is a trap, I agreed. Arthur handed them the blueprint, and now they are inviting us in. I looked at the dashboard. I thought about the recording of Miles. I thought about the letter in the safety deposit box. Don't trust the man standing next to you. I had cut Arthur loose. I had exposed Miles. I was the only one left. We are going, I said. Sarah. We are going, I repeated. But we are not going to sneak in. If they want a show, let us give them a show. I pulled the laptop open. Drive, I told Rosa. I have to write the script for my final episode. The Advanced Neural Recovery Center looked less like a hospital and more like a tombstone made of concrete and glass. It sat on a ridge just south of the Canadian border, surrounded by a perimeter fence topped with razor wire that hummed with high-voltage electricity. The air up here was thin and smelled of impending snow. Rosa parked the van near the main gate. The engine ticked as it cooled. Do not look at them, Rosa whispered, her eyes scanning the surveillance towers. But know that they are looking at us. Every camera is tracking our heat signatures. If they wanted us dead, we would be dead. They are letting us in. Because they think they have won, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. They think I am walking in here to surrender. Just remember, Rosa said, checking the slide on her pistol before tucking it into her waistband. If the shooting starts, you drop to the floor. I will buy you 30 seconds. Do not waste them. We stepped out into the biting wind. The main door slid open silently before we even touched the handle. Standing in the lobby was a woman in a pristine white lab coat. She was tall, with severe black hair cut in a sharp bob, and eyes that looked like they had been surgically removed of all empathy. This was Dr. Lila Monroe. "You are late," she said. She did not introduce herself. She did not offer a hand. She turned on her heel and walked toward a set of double doors secured by a biometric lock. "We have a narrow window before the shift change. If you want to see the facility, move." I followed her, my boots squeaking on the sterile linoleum. "Where is she?" I asked. "Where is my mother?" Lila swiped her badge. The light turned green. "We are walking to Ward C. Keep your voice down. The acoustics in here are designed to carry sound." We entered a long hallway lined with glass rooms. It was a human zoo. Inside each room, men and women in gray jumpsuits paced in circles or sat staring at blank walls. They looked healthy physically, but their eyes were vacant. They were the inconvenient truths of the syndicate, medicated into oblivion. "These are the ones who ask too many questions," Lila said, her voice clinical. "Accountants who found discrepancies, mistresses who wanted child support. We call this the quiet room. The drugs we administer here degrade the synaptic pathways responsible for long-term memory. Give it 6 months, and they do not even remember their own names." My stomach turned. "You are a monster." Lila stopped and looked at me. "I am a researcher. Ms. Snow. I work for a board of directors that views human beings as line items. I am trying to change management. That is why you are here. I need you to expose the people who ordered this, Miles and Derek, so that my faction can take over and run this place ethically." "Ethically?" I scoffed. "You are running a prison." "We provide care," she corrected coldly, "but we do not murder. That is the difference between me and your brother." She stopped in front of a room at the end of the hall. It was numbered 302. "This was Elaine's room," Lila said. I stepped forward, pressing my hand against the cold glass. The room was empty. The bed was made. The chair was pushed in. There was no sign of life. "Was?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Where is she?" "She is gone," Lila said. I spun around, grabbing Lila by the lapels of her coat. Rosa stepped forward, her hand hovering near her weapon. "You said she was here," I shouted. "You said on the phone that I had 24 hours. "I lied," Lila said, not even flinching. "I needed you to come. If I had told you the truth, you would have run." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a tablet. She tapped the screen and held it up to me. 2 days ago, I tried to move her," Lila explained. "I knew Miles was planning to purge the facility. I falsified a transfer order to get her to a safe house in Duluth. But the order was flagged. A security team intercepted us at the loading dock. I could not stop them without blowing my cover, but before they took her, I let her record this." She pressed play. The video was shaky, taken in what looked like a supply closet. The lighting was harsh, and there, filling the frame, was my mother. She looked older. Her hair was completely gray, and she was thinner than I remembered. But her eyes? They were bright. They were fierce. "Sarah," my mother said to the camera. Her voice was raspy, but strong. "If you are seeing this, it means the plan failed. It means I am being moved to a black site. Do not come for me." She leaned closer to the lens. "Do not come for me," she repeated. "It is a trap. Miles knows you are looking. He will use me to pull you into the open. I am done, sweetheart. I have played my part. I planted the seeds. You are the harvest. Do not trade your life for mine. Do not make a deal with them. Burn it down. Burn it all down." The video cut to black. I stared at the dark screen, tears streaming down my face. She knew. Even in the middle of being kidnapped, she was thinking about the strategy. She was telling me to let her go. "Where did they take her?" I whispered. "I do not know," Lila said. "The transport team was private contractors. No paper trail. She could be in a basement in Chicago. She could be at the bottom of Lake Superior. But as long as you hold that data, she is a liability to them. If you release it, they kill her. If you destroy it, maybe they let her live as a bargaining chip. Suddenly, the hallway was bathed in flashing red light. A siren began to wail, a low mechanical groan that vibrated in my teeth. "Alert," a computerized voice announced. "Perimeter breach in Sector 4. Unauthorized access." Lila looked at her watch, confused. "That is not me. I disabled the silent alarm. Not the perimeter grid. Who else is here?" Rosa pulled out her phone, checking the feed from the van. Her face went pale. "It is Arthur," she said. She turned the screen toward me. The security camera at the rear delivery entrance showed a chaotic scene. A black SUV had rammed the gate. Men in tactical gear were dragging a figure out of the back seat. It was my father. He was limping, blood streaming down his face. He looked terrified. He was shouting something at the camera, but there was no audio. "They tracked him," Rosa said. "After we cut him loose, they knew he would try to follow us to save the day. They let him get all the way to the gate, and then they bagged him." Lila looked at the monitor, then at me. Her expression shifted. She saw an opportunity. "They have your father," Lila said, "and they have your mother. You have lost Sarah." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so Rosa wouldn't hear. Though in the small hallway, privacy was impossible. "But we can still salvage this," Lila said. "Give me the drive. I will wipe the parts that implicate my team. We will leave the evidence against Miles and Derek. We hand that over to the board. They will be forced to resign. I will take control of Aurora. I will guarantee your father's release, and I will use the Foundation's resources to find your mother." "You want me to sanitize the record," I said. "You want me to protect the institution that tortured my mother so you can run it." "I am offering you a way out," Lila hissed. "Look at the screen. They are going to kill him, and if you release that full data dump, you kill your mother too. Is your integrity worth both your parents?" I looked at the monitor. One of the tactical officers had a gun pressed to the back of Arthur's head. He was on his knees in the snow. I looked at the empty room where my mother had been held prisoner for 2 years. I looked at Lila, who was holding out her hand, expecting me to be reasonable, expecting me to be Arthur. "You are right," I said softly. "I cannot save everyone." Lila nodded. "Smart girl. Give me the drive." I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the USB drive, but then they moved past it. I pulled out a small lapel microphone, a wireless transmitter connected to the hacking rig Rosa had set up in the van. "What are you doing?" Lila asked, her eyes narrowing. "My mother told me to save myself," I said. "But she did not mean run away. She meant save my soul." I looked up at the security camera in the corner of the hallway. I knew the feed was being watched by Derek. I knew Miles was probably watching too. And I knew that Rosa had patched this feed directly into my podcast's hosting platform. "You forgot one thing, Doctor," I said. I clipped the microphone to my collar. I tapped it twice. Thump thump. "What is that?" Lila demanded, stepping back. "I am not just Arthur Vale's daughter," I said, my voice rising, steady and clear. "He taught me how to hide. He taught me how to negotiate. And look where it got him, on his knees in the snow." I looked straight into the lens of the camera. "But I am also Elaine Snow's daughter, and she taught me that you do not negotiate with cancer." I pulled out my phone and hit the command key Rosa had programmed. "Execute." "Stop her," Lila screamed, lunging for me. Rosa stepped in, leveling her gun at Lila's chest. "Let her speak." The red tally light on the camera turned solid green. We were live. "My name is Sarah Snow," I said, staring down the barrel of the lens, knowing that my face was currently being broadcast to the millions of subscribers who thought they were tuning in for a true crime story. "And I am currently standing inside the Advanced Neural Recovery Center in Minnesota, a black site prison run by the Vale and Harrow Syndicate." Lila froze, her face drained of color. She knew it was too late. "For the last 4 years, you have been told lies," I continued, speaking fast, fueled by a cold, righteous fury. "You were told my father died in a car accident, You were told my mother died of a stroke, but the people running this facility, the people running the Aurora Wellness Foundation, are not doctors. They are cleaners. I held up the tablet with the video of my mother. This is Elaine Snow, I said. She was held here against her will. She was drugged to keep her silent, and tonight, I am going to show you exactly who did it. I keyed the next command. On the screens of listeners all over the world, the feed split. One side was my face. The other side began to cycle through the documents. The emails from Miles authorizing resolutions, the financial logs from Arthur showing the money laundering, the video of Elaine, the photo of Arthur on his knees at the gate. I am not making a deal, I said to the camera, addressing Derek, addressing Miles, addressing the world. I am not hiding anymore. You took my family. You took my life. So now, I am taking your shadows. The alarm blared louder. I could hear boots pounding down the hallway. The security team was coming. I did not run. I stood my ground, right in front of my mother's empty room. My father is outside, I said. They are holding a gun to his head. If he dies, you will see it live. If I die, you will see it live. There are no more secrets. There is only the truth, and it is staring you right in the face. I looked at Lila. She was trembling. She knew her career, her coup. Her life was over. Smile, doctor, I said. We are on the air. The little green light on the camera was the only stable thing in a world that was rapidly disintegrating. The moment the live stream hit the feed, the subscriber count exploded. It went from 50,000 to 200,000 in 3 minutes. People were not just listening to an audio drama anymore. They were staring into the fluorescent-lit hallway of a black site prison. They saw the empty room where my mother had been held. They saw the reinforced glass. They saw the terror in Dr. Lila Monroe's eyes. This is not a set, I said, walking down the corridor, the camera following my every move. This is the Advanced Neural Recovery Center. It is owned by the Aurora Wellness Foundation, and for the last 2 years, it has been used to silence the victims of the Vale and Harrow syndicate. In the van outside, Rosa was working miracles. She had set up a mirroring protocol. Every second of footage was being replicated and bounced to servers in Iceland, Brazil, and Singapore. She sent direct links to the personal inboxes of every investigative journalist I had ever met, along with the encrypted keys to the financial data. The syndicate could try to kill the feed, but they would have to shut down half the internet to do it. In Chicago, inside the boardroom of Vale and Harrow, the silence must have been deafening. I imagined Derek Vale watching his empire crumble on an 80-inch monitor, but here in the facility, Arthur was watching too. They had dragged him from the gate into a holding room down the hall. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his hands zip-tied, staring at a security screen, watching his daughter burn down the house he had built. I moved to the next room. I held up the tablet Rosa had synced to the feed. You want to know where the money comes from? I asked the camera. It comes from pension funds. It comes from municipal bonds. I am uploading the flowcharts now. Look at the screen. That is the Orion Crest laundering scheme. That is the signature of Arthur Vale authorizing the transfers. And that, I pointed to a document on the screen, is the authorization for the medical kidnapping of Elaine Snow. Suddenly, the intercom system screeched. A face appeared on the large security monitor mounted on the wall. It was Miles. He was sitting in his office in Chicago, looking pale but composed. He was trying to take control of the narrative, unaware that his face was being projected to millions of screens. Sarah, Miles said, his voice dripping with condescending concern. Please, stop this. You are having a breakdown. We are sending a medical team to help you. You are delusional. Am I? I asked, looking at the monitor. Am I delusional, Miles? You are grieving, Miles said, his eyes shifting nervously. Mom died 4 years ago. This conspiracy theory is just your way of coping. Please, let Dr. Monroe help you. I did not argue. I just pressed a button on my phone. The audio file I had stolen from the safe deposit box, the one recorded by my mother inside the facility, began to play over the facility's PA system and onto the live stream. Voice of Miles. The mother is becoming a variable. We cannot risk her snapping out of it. I will not let her ruin what we have built. Process her. Miles's face on the monitor went slack. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like a corpse. Voice of Miles. Code Black. It authorizes total administrative discretion. When I sign that line, the file is closed. That is you. Miles, I said to the monitor. That is your voice. And now, the whole world knows exactly what kind of brother you are. Lila Monroe looked at the monitor, then at me. She looked at the red tally light on the camera. She realized that the syndicate was dead. There was no recovering from this. If she stayed loyal, she would go down for conspiracy to commit murder. She made her choice. Guard! Lila shouted to the armed men at the end of the hall. Stand down! Lower your weapons! The guards hesitated. I said stand down, Lila screamed, her voice cracking. It is over. We are cooperating. I am declaring status as a federal witness. She looked at the camera, raising her hands. I am Dr. Lila Monroe. I am surrendering the facility. I have the location of the backup archives. I can testify against the board. The internal division happened in real time. The rats were fleeing the ship. Then, the sound came. It started as a low thrumming and grew into a roar that shook the glass walls. Thwup, thwup, thwup. Helicopters. Outside the long windows, the darkness was suddenly ripped apart by spotlights. Blue and red lights flashed against the snow, creating a kaleidoscope of panic. Sirens wailed, layering over each other in a chaotic symphony. Rosa's voice crackled in my earpiece. The FBI is breaching the gate. They have the coordinates. They have the files. It is done. Sarah. I stood still in the middle of the hallway. The adrenaline that had sustained me for 48 hours suddenly evaporated, leaving me hollow. In Chicago, the feed showed chaos in the background of Miles's office. A man in a suit, one of the internal lawyers who had received my anonymous tip, stepped into the frame. He was shouting something about an asset freeze. He reached over and terminated the connection. Miles's face vanished, replaced by static. The double doors at the end of the hallway burst open. It was not the FBI yet. It was the facility guards, surrendering. They were escorting the prisoners out to the loading dock to hand them over to the federal agents swarming the courtyard. Arthur was among them. He was walking between two other executives from Aurora. His hands were cuffed behind his back. The zip ties had been replaced by steel. He looked terrible, bruised, limping, his coat torn. As they passed me, the procession slowed. Arthur stopped. He looked at me. There was shame in his eyes, deep and crushing, but underneath it, there was something else, a strange, quiet pride. He had spent his life trying to protect me by hiding me, by keeping me small, and in the end, I had grown too big for his world to contain. He opened his mouth to speak, but he had no words left. I looked straight at him. The camera was still rolling, capturing the final interaction between the father who lied and the daughter who burned him for it. You died the first time in Wyoming, I whispered, my voice barely loud enough for the microphone to catch. The second time is today, when all the truth is finally spoken, the rest. I looked at the flashing lights outside, at the empty room where my mother had fought her own war, and finally back at him. The rest is mine. Arthur nodded. He accepted it. The guard pushed him forward. He walked away, disappearing into the glare of the floodlights outside. I looked at the camera one last time. I did not smile. I did not ask for a subscription. I just reached up and severed the connection. The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid shut on the scene. The sound of clicking handcuffs merged with the wail of sirens. The screen went black. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed this journey, please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to hear your thoughts on Sarah's choice. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.